Hey guys, today I'm down in San Diego taking a look at what Ford is calling America's only street performance truck, the Ford Maverick Lobo. It's also one of the most affordable trucks in North America, although the Maverick Lobo is a little bit more expensive than the base model, and the Maverick is certainly no longer a $20,000 truck. We're going to talk about all that and more in this video. For those of you that remember, Ford's last street performance truck was the Lightning, and I'm not talking about the electric one, I'm talking about the gasoline-powered one from back when I was in high school and college. This is not exactly that same format of vehicle because we have a turbocharged four-cylinder engine up front, and Ford's all-wheel drive system is standard that employs a twin-clutch unit in the back, but primarily it's going to be sending most of the power to the front wheels. Let's take a look and talk about why you might want the Lobo or why you might want one of the other Mavericks. And if you want to know more about the hybrid model, which now gets all-wheel drive, that's coming up in a different video. For this model year, every Maverick gets a bit of an exterior update. We get wider and bolder grills, but the Lobo gets a unique grille that certainly gives me Volvo vibes. Let me know what you think about that. It's kind of a cascading waterfall style grille. Every model gets LED headlights, but there are different LED headlights depending on the trim level. If you get the base versions of the Maverick, we get reflector headlights. Here we get projector LEDs and a single projector element there rather than the twin stacked unit, which is kind of why this headlight module is so large. The rest of the bumper, that's pretty common between the models, but we get different DRLs in the top end LED headlights. That's the one we see here, of course. Turn signals, those are still incandescent, rather surprisingly there. The Lobo doesn't just get a unique grille though, it also gets more cooling and a bigger fan than the other models. And that's important if you do plan on doing some autocrossing in your Maverick. I don't know exactly why you would, but we are definitely going to be doing that later in this video. When Ford first launched the Maverick, a lot of reviews made me laugh because you saw headlines saying America's first truly compact truck in decades. Well, it depends on exactly how you think about 200 inches long, because that's the general dimension tip to tail. Some models are a little bit under 200 inches, some models are a little bit over 200 inches because of the different bumpers front and rear. That puts this about the size of a Dodge Durango, actually bigger than some versions of the Ford Explorer. So if you think the Ford Explorer is a compact vehicle, then sure, the Maverick is a compact vehicle as well. You might be thinking, what's going on? Well, if you think about 1980s small pickup trucks, they didn't have what's going on back here, rear doors. And that's why this is the size that it is, because they needed to be able to give us compact crossover-like interior volume with a pickup trucky looking front end and a usable bed space behind. And if this was a truly compact pickup truck, the size of the original Toyota trucks in North America, the bed would have to end, I don't know, somewhere around there, and that wouldn't be very practical. In every new vehicle design, there's compromise. For the Maverick, that would be rear seat legroom. You're going to find less in here than you find in the Bronco Sport, even though the Bronco Sport is considerably smaller on the outside, but that's because it doesn't, of course, have a 54.4-inch bed behind. One of the most common questions I get from viewers is, why don't we have more small trucks in North America? The honest answer is, car companies didn't think American shoppers would be interested in them, and that would even include Ford. When they launched the Maverick, they thought they'd sell maybe about 70,000 of them a year. Turns out in 2024, they sold about 150,000, and they probably could have sold more if they could have built more. I don't suspect availability will get better for 2025 because of the new Lobo model and the fact that we get that hybrid all-wheel drive model. Now, why were car companies caught a little off balance? Well, because we've never had a format of vehicle like this. This is a white space vehicle, as they like to call them in the industry, because yes, we've had trucks about the same size as this before, but they weren't unibody trucks. We've had trucks about the same size before, but they didn't have 4 doors and 5 seats. And they didn't have optional hybrid systems or a street performance version like this Lobo. And that all means car companies just didn't know people would be interested. Turns out they really were. And I think it's easy to see why, because the Maverick is really handy. Let's talk about the bed a little bit more. Yes, it's 54.4 inches long, and that doesn't sound as handy as an 8-foot bed. But because this is a truck, you can still carry 8-foot things in it. They're just going to hang out, maybe about 2 feet beyond the tailgate. So it's not an enormous amount of overhang. Some of that's occupied, of course, by the tailgate itself, and some of that would just be hanging out there. Ford also gives us a lot of practical touches when it comes to cargo management. For instance, we can relatch these in this position, and now the edge of the tailgate is level with the top of the wheel wells. That's important because between the wheel wells, it's not 4 feet wide. It's 42.6 inches wide. But the opening is wider than 4 feet, and the entire bed maximum is 53.3 inches. So you can definitely carry those 4x8 sheets of whatever you might want to carry, or even 4x10s if you're willing for them to hang out a little bit further. And that's part of why Ford also gives us a lot of cargo tie-down locations. Tie-down locations on the tailgate itself, movable tie-down locations on this utility rail on the inside, tie-down points in the bed and on the side of the bed as well. If you're more of a camper or an adventurer, there's also a power outlet back here. Even in the 2-liter turbo version, we also get some 12-volt power ports in the rear that are kind of handy. They're behind these little doors, and if you pull them off, you get a Molex connector so you can actually attach those accessories without cutting into the vehicle's wiring. These are really practical touches for people that maybe plan on modifying their vehicle even lightly, or might not have modified their vehicle normally, but now feel that they can because Ford has made it a little bit easier. The obvious downside to a small truck like this is going to be towing capacity and payload capacity. Payload capacity in this model is just over 1,000 pounds. And remember, payload includes the driver and all the passengers and cargo and tongue weight for your trailer. Every version of the Maverick can tow 2,000 pounds. Some versions can tow 4,000 pounds with that particular option. But importantly, the Lobo cannot tow 4,000 pounds because of some of the suspension changes that we're going to talk about. Now, the design of the rear end, pretty typical pickup truck fare. We have combination LED and incandescent tail lamps there. The tow hitch receiver, 2 inches of course, with a 4-pin wiring harness on the side. I do kind of wish that was a 7-pin connector. And then not a metal bumper in the back. This is a plastic wrapped bumper, of course, with parking sensors integrated into it. Now back to the Lobo. This is more than just a tire and wheel package. The wheels, I don't know if they're exactly my cup of tea. They're kind of turban style, but I'm not the biggest fan of the black design. I might swap those out myself. We also don't get wider tires than we find in the others, 225 width tires. But obviously all of this can be swapped because the important parts, those are bolted onto the Maverick itself. We get a lowered suspension in the front, about 1/2 inch, about 1 inch lower in the rear. A regular Maverick has a little bit of a raked appearance because of the payload realities in the back. This is a little bit more level, definitely more in keeping with the street performance mantra. We then get strut tower mounts from a Mach-E and other suspension components from Ford's performance lineup in Europe. So they definitely focused on steering and suspension performance in the Lobo. Then we get some interesting tweaks under the hood that are a little surprising. On the surface, the Lobo drivetrain seems pretty similar to the rest of the Maverick lineup. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo, producing 250 horsepower, 277 pound-feet, just like the other non-hybrid models. But there are some important changes for the street truck version. We get that improved cooling that I mentioned earlier. Then we get a different transmission and a different all-wheel drive system. Well, not exactly a different transmission actually, because this is the same core 8-speed design with some important software and a few hardware tweaks. Most notably, they have disabled second gear in software. So this transmission shifts from first directly to third. You might be thinking, doesn't that actually mean a slower 0 to 60 time? Well, according to Ford, no, because this transmission spends less time shifting 0 to 60. In the regular Maverick, the second gear is there for improved fuel economy. In this Maverick, second gear is removed for better performance. The all-wheel drive system also gets an important change. Shared with the Tremor model, we have a twin-clutch rear axle unit that's actually somewhat similar to Acura's super handling all-wheel drive. It can effectively act as a limited slip differential in the rear, or a locking differential in the rear, or a torque vectoring differential, which is the intriguing part. So it can send all the power destined for the rear to a single rear wheel whenever it wants to. And that's what makes this handle differently than the rest of the Maverick lineup. Fuel economy though, that's pretty similar, 23 to 25 miles per gallon for this drivetrain, depending on the trim you're looking at. If you want better fuel economy, that would be the hybrid up there at 38 miles per gallon for the front-wheel drive model. At 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, I found the driver's seat to be quite comfortable, but you should know that it's not as adjustable as some. We have a 2-way adjustable lumbar support. It's hitting me in just the right place in the back, but the seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt. It simply goes up and down on this powered seat. And the passenger seat, that's not powered at all. We do, however, have a tilt telescopic steering column with a pretty solid range of motion. As I said earlier in the video, legroom is one of the compromises you have to make to have a functional bed in the back. So we find less legroom in here than we do in a Bronco Sport, although headroom is pretty generous in the back. It's actually a little bit more upright than some other more mid-sized trucks that you might want to cross-shop this against. So if you're looking at a Tacoma or even a Ranger, you actually may find more usable headroom in the back of the Maverick. Even in the center position, which is a little higher off the ground, I have a reasonable amount of headroom. But with this front seat all the way back in its tracks, you can see there's just not a lot of legroom left. So as a family vehicle, if you have kids in forward-facing child seats or booster seats, you should be just fine. if you have kids in rear-facing seats, just know that there's not going to be a lot of room, even to put one in the middle, because the general dimensions of this interior are narrower, and that means that a rear-facing seat might not actually fit between those two front seats. The rear seat does flip up. There's a little piece of webbing there, if I can do that in here, and we get a little bit of additional storage space under the floor, but not as much, obviously, as you'd find in a larger pickup truck. The Lobo we're looking at today is not a base trim, so this definitely has an MSRP a few $1,000s more than that $36,000 base price, but we have a power moonroof right there. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable head restraints for the driver and front passenger. Here's a look back there at the rear passenger area. It's a little bit difficult to see, but they actually do carve out some extra space for headroom behind where that sunroof goes, and I do like that touch. Moving up to the front seats, we have contrasting yellow and blue stitching on the seats. That's kind of an interesting flavor. Let me know what you think about the color choices. I know some folks out here weren't the biggest fan of this sort of acid wash lime color for that inner stitching there. We have the Lobo logo embossed in the rear seat back, or sorry, front seat back there. We don't have any seat ventilation or perforations in these seats, but they are heated. Moving over to the front doors, we find a reasonable percentage of hard materials. So this entire lower section of the door, actually all of the door really except for the armrest, that is all hard plastic. And there are a bunch of different textures and materials going on, including this sort of Smurf blue accent right there. I know on the camera it may appear a little bit more teal, but it's actually very blue. And then we have navy blue for the bulk of the door panels, kind of a mid-gray for that intersection and that storage area below. Ford uses a bunch of different textures to kind of differentiate the sections. This has kind of a crosshatch texture on it, looks very fabric-like. We then have that soft touch armrest right there. And that combination of textures and colors continues over onto the dashboard, where we have sort of a navy blue upper section of the dash, same texture, gray midsection of the dash with kind of a geometric pattern embossed in it, exposed screw heads and some extra texture there, and then more navy blue at the bottom of the dash. I am quite partial to blue interiors, so let me know what you guys think. In here we have a glove compartment that you could definitely fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. We've been storing cameras, things like that. This is what the accessory harness looks like that you plug into the back that I showed you earlier, those 12-volt power ports. Now moving up to the center of the dashboard, up here we have the Bang & Olufsen, B&O, which is basically Bang & Olufsen audio system. Center channel speaker there, that's optional. Storage cubby right there. And then we find the big standard LCD infotainment system. This, of course, features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and you can choose whether you want it to occupy more of the screen or less of the screen. I do like the ability to select that. Every model is going to have a 5G modem chip enabled. So over-the-air updates and, of course, mapping, Wi-Fi, that sort of thing, that's all going to be available. We have more blue accents down lower on the dashboard, right there in those air vents. Some physical controls, but you'll notice no physical climate control buttons. That's because climate control is done in the infotainment system. I actually kind of wish we had just a few duplicate buttons, maybe just for temperature, but I think that the screen works in the general shape of the dashboard. Moving down lower, we have a Qi wireless charging mat, engine start-stop button, a button over here for the powered rear window. Yep, it's not manual. USB-C and USB-A inputs for the audio system. Some extra storage cubbies where you can put your smartphone. Two big cup holders there. Those were easily able to accommodate large takeout drinks. Rotary style shifter with a manual mode. Electric parking brake. We have auto start-stop, enable, disable, stability and traction control. Some extra storage going on here with the typical Ford key that we see in everything else in the lineup. An armrest with more of that contrasting stitching and a surprising amount of storage below that. The manual mode is there, of course, because we have paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel. This is a touch I wish really more pickup trucks would adopt. The steering wheel, it looks like the rest of Ford's crossover lineup, with controls for the adaptive cruise control over here on this side, volume up, down, and then on this side, controls for the multifunction LCD instrument cluster, which is not a full LCD. If you go in close, you'll notice that the engine temperature and fuel levels are digital gauges, but they're LEDs, and then the LCD itself stretches from this corner over there to the other side. It is configurable, and there is some turn-by-turn navigation direction, but we don't have two-screen mapping or two-screen CarPlay, anything like that going on here. All right, let's get this out on the road. The first thing you're gonna notice is definitely the different transmission tuning. We have the missing second gear, which means there's a slightly larger jump from first to quote-unquote second, which is third in the other models with the turbo and the 8-speed automatic transmission. But that does get you quicker 0 to 60 than in our last test of the Maverick. This model went 0 to 60 in 6.9 seconds. And there are two of us in the vehicle. I suspect that if we had this back at home and we were testing at our usual altitude and conditions, we might actually get down to 6.8 seconds. The correction factor on our race box actually suggested 6.8 as a valid correction. Now, the 60-0 stopping distance, that's basically the same because we have the same size tires on this model as we have on the rest of the lineup. 225 width, that meant 124 feet from 60 back to 0, so pretty similar to the rest of the lineup. Tires are, of course, the easiest thing to swap out aftermarket. You could definitely put some summer tires on here. You could go considerably wider wheels, wider tires, grippier compounds, and that would dramatically improve the handling capability. And I actually appreciate vehicles that go in this direction, where we have improved suspension, improved performance, and then they leave the handling capability, that actual grip level, up to you as the end user, because that's the easy part to change. We'll see this a bit more out on the Autocross course later in the day, but in a nutshell, the torque vectoring rear axle is really noticeable. If you enter a corner like this, it feels just like your average everyday crossover, but if you floor it, you notice that the rear end starts to steer more like a rear-wheel drive pickup truck, not a four-wheel drive pickup truck or an all-wheel drive, the relatively few all-wheel drive trucks we have out there. And in that respect, this is actually a little bit like the Honda Ridgeline, because the Honda Ridgeline has actually a very similar axle in the rear. Honda calls that IVTM4. Ford uses a different supplier and a different manufacturer. They call theirs a twin clutch unit. Basically the same thing is going on in the back. You have what is not actually a differential in the rear. Instead, it's a geared coupling with clutch packs on the left and on the right side output. And that allows the vehicle to have them spin at the same rate, spin at different rates, send more power to one wheel, less power to the other wheel. It's a really intriguing option that has, again, not just on-road benefits like this, but also off-road benefits in the Tremor trim. The next thing you're likely to notice is the suspension tune in the Maverick. It is definitely firmer than the rest of the Maverick lineup. That's logical, of course, because they significantly lowered the suspension in the rear and they lowered the suspension in the front. We also get that different steering rack and different suspension design up front, so it feels a little bit more direct than the rest of the Maverick lineup. Although the Maverick's always been relatively fun to drive because it's not a body-on-frame truck. It's a unibody truck, kind of like the Ridgeline, and there's definitely a lot of similarities between this and the Honda, just due to the very nature of the vehicle. This is, of course, wrapped in a smaller package with a turbo engine instead of a V6, and it's a lot less expensive. Helping complete the package, certainly for some, you hear a lot of the engine in the cabin, and you'll definitely hear that turbo wastegate when it blows off. You hear a lot of turbo, a lot of engine. It's not exactly the most refined engine sound, certainly compared to something like the Santa Cruz or the Ridgeline, but I think it kind of works with the personality of this truck. On the downside, there's just not a lot of sound deadening in here, period. And you will certainly notice that out on rougher road surfaces where you get a lot of road noise from the back. And if you do plan on towing those smaller trailers, because this doesn't have a separate frame, you're certainly going to hear that hitch rattling around in the receiver. Fuel economy, that's a little bit difficult to talk about because clearly we haven't been driving this on our usual home turf, but out here in Southern California, we've been averaging 23 miles per gallon. So pretty close to what the EPA says we should be getting in the Lobo trim. All right, let's get this out on the Autocross course where we can really see the torque vectoring at work. We are in the Lobo mode, drive mode, and this is definitely where the unibody design of the Maverick is an asset because everything is going to be a lot tighter than in a body-on-frame truck. And this is better for handling in these situations where you can definitely have a decent amount of fun. We also have those paddle shifters if you are so inclined. On this course though, you can really feel the torque vectoring in the rear and it doing its job, getting you around this course. It is an awful lot of fun. And of course I just absolutely missed those cones right there, but this is certainly more fun than you'd be able to have in something like a Raptor or a Tacoma or anything along those lines. Oh, absolutely murdered a few cones. That's okay. I'm apparently not driving this course as intended because there's a whole slalom there that I just skipped a few times, but this is certainly more fun than I had expected it to be. When it starts pushing in the corners, you're definitely rewarded by applying more power. That's the benefit of the torque vectoring in the back, is that you have that ability to add some yaw motion to the vehicle by digging deeper in the throttle. Yeah, definitely fun on an autocross. Now let's get down to brass tacks. How much is the Lobo going to set you back? Well, it's less expensive than I thought at $36,850, including destination, but obviously that is more than the least expensive Maverick, which starts at $28,590. Now, interestingly, that would be the front-wheel drive hybrid. That is the least expensive version. If you want the turbo, you can get the turbo engine and all-wheel drive for $29,165, but that is not going to give you the lowered suspension, the different steering rack, and importantly, you won't get the twin-clutch rear axle in that model. You will, however, get it in the Tremor, which is the most expensive version at $41,195. That's quite logical, because the twin axle setup in the back, or sorry, the twin clutch setup in the back axle of this vehicle doesn't just help out on-road, it also has some off-road applications, which is why we find it in the street truck and the off-road truck version of this. Now, at the moment, there really is no competition, especially to the Lobo. Yes, you could look at a Hyundai Santa Cruz, and there is a turbo engine in that model, but no version of the Santa Cruz will have a torque vectoring axle in the back, and there's no street truck version of the Santa Cruz at the moment. The Santa Cruz, interestingly, is also kind of on the expensive side, if I'm honest. Yes, there's the turbo. Yes, it's a little bit more comfortable. It is a little bit roomier in some dimensions on the inside, and a little bit more premium here and there. But I think that Hyundai was really surprised that Ford priced the Maverick so low. Now, the price tag has increased dramatically since this model launched, nearly $8,000 or so of price increase base model to base model, but I always thought that the first generation Maverick was perhaps priced a little too low to be sensible, and this pricing seems more logical as far as Ford making money and people still having an affordable truck option. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section, and of course stay tuned because we should have one of these at home soon to do a more complete review on coming up in the next 2 months. Also, if you haven't checked out that hybrid video, be sure and check that out because I have to admit, if I were shopping for a Maverick as cool as the Lobo is, I would probably get the hybrid anyway. See all of you later.